Good evening. This is another Facebook Live edition of Photography After Hours. I'm Scott Hartwick. We're down at Parkwood Studios tonight. And with us today is Wes Maggio. Wes Maggio is with Tether Tools, and we're going to talk about all things Tether tonight. So Wes, good to have you here.
Thanks a lot, Scott. Appreciate you having me.
Yeah, so let's jump right in. Let's start at the beginning with tethering, in case people that are watching don't know why they should tether. Let's just jump into why tether,
Sure.
and how that all works and who's it for.
Well, let's back up even further. I always like to kind of start when I'm speaking to someone about tethering to first answer the question, what is tethered photography? Right from the get-go. To tether means to connect, really. And what we're doing when we tether is we're connecting our camera to our computer. And most commonly, many of you have probably already seen the orange cables before, we do so via cable. Right. We make a connection to just about every camera, to just about any computer, via cable of varying lengths, depending on your particular needs. But we make a connection between the camera and the computer. And then as we take pictures with our camera, instead of writing to the card or showing up on the back of the camera, we're writing directly to the computer. Okay. Now, I say we're doing that, but at the same time, depending on your camera, you can also write to both your card and your computer at the same time. But that's a little nuance we won't get into right now. But basically, again, you're connecting the camera to the computer. You do so via cable. And then today, we also make wireless transmission devices. So you can connect wirelessly from your camera to your computer.
Yeah, I can see some advantages with that. Mm-hmm. Is there, when you're using a wire, the image comes across pretty much instantaneously to the computer.
Nearly instantaneously. There's some nuances to it. I mean, once you've made that connection, and we're going to get to your first question, why tether in the first place. Just kind of figuring out what to do in the first place is sometimes helps solidify the reasons why. Sure. But once you've made that connection physically, either via cable or wirelessly using a wireless transmission device, sure. You need some type of software on that computer or even a tablet device to accept the images as they come over. So most commonly, people are using applications like Lightroom. They're using Capture One. They're using Smart Shooter, and there's roughly a dozen or maybe even 24 different applications or utilities that you can use to accept those images. And depending on what you're doing and why you're doing it, you might use one application over another.
Right.
So you've made the physical connection, and then you've got the application that accepts those images. So that's kind of what you're doing to get started. Mm-hmm. Beyond that, why would you want to do it? There's a variety of different reasons. My favorite one, really the reason why I got into tether photography long before I even went to Tether Tools, was so that I could see an image on a larger screen. Okay. And that might not necessarily immediately come to mind as a benefit, but being able to check critical focus, making sure your composition looks good, being able to collaborate with other people, I mean, those are really the important things to me. But it's that collaborative aspect, I think, that is one of the most valuable reasons to tether.
Yeah, so, and you left out one thing. So one of the reasons that I started to move to it is that I could check composition on the back of my camera, mm-hmm. and that worked pretty good. But what I was relying on it for was to see where my exposure was. And my camera lies to me every time I take a picture. And so when I started to tether, I have a calibrated screen that I'm looking at, and I know my exposure's right.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, a lot of times you're looking at a JPEG preview, of what you've shot, right. And then you bring your raw files in, things look a little bit differently, and that's obviously still the case. Can still be the case depending on what application you're tethering into. Mm-hmm. But yeah, checking that exposure is absolutely critical.
Yeah, absolutely.
You've probably done it. I know I've done it. I'm pretty sure just about everybody's done it before. You think you got the shot. Maybe you've even zoomed in on the back of the camera and you think you got it, mm-hmm. and you get back and maybe that eye is not quite as sharp as you'd like.
Soft,
You're focused here when you should be focused here, and you couldn't tell on the back of the camera. So being able to see an image on a larger screen really ensures that I've got the shot, and I find that really valuable.
Yep, it is absolutely valuable, yeah. So, all right, so that's cool. So now we know what that is. We know kind of why. Mm-hmm. So let's do the how.
Yep. So we started the conversation with making that connection, that physical connection. Again, what I like to help people understand, we might sit down and talk for 20, 30 minutes here, and what I really want people to walk away from when I'm having a conversation with somebody is if you forget absolutely everything I've said, you take one thing away, you go to tethertools.com, there's a search by camera function, drop down the main menu. You're going to plug in what camera you have, You're going to plug in what computer you're plugging into, meaning the connection type, USB, either USB-A or now the new USB-C standard. And what we're going to return to you is the cable that you need, the wireless transmission device, case air, if your particular camera is compatible with it, And then we're going to make some recommendations on software applications that you can accept those images, some kits that will help you, that will help your workflow, not just a cable and other things, or tables and some of the other products that we offer. We're going to return all the different products and recommendations that we make for your particular camera and computer combination.
Yeah, that's really nice. It's nice because people will get confused. You see a bunch of cables, they don't know what the connection is, but it's, like you say, go pick out your camera, you know what that is, and then you've already done all the hard work for them. I think that's great.
Yeah, that's the best place to start. You know, the how, again, I typically recommend that someone look at a cabled connection first if you've never done it before. It's the most affordable way to do it. In many respects, I say, you know what? Your camera probably came with a USB cable in the box. Why don't you go ahead and try that with an application that maybe you already own? Most commonly, it's Lightroom. You know, there's your lowest cost of entry. Try that out. Beyond that, you know, you want to get past that 4-foot cable that you get in the box with your camera. And then we've got, you know, cables that are much more durable, much more robust from a connection standpoint, much longer. So that's when you're going to want to start to look at some of the things that Tether Tools has to offer.
So one of the things that I've always known about USB in general was that there was a length limit for transmission. How do you guys solve a longer cable length?
Sure. You know, well, we make cables of varying lengths, variety of lengths, 1 foot, 3 foot, 6, you know, 10, 15. You know, I typically recommend that somebody uses a 15-foot cable. I mean, if you're making a connection between your camera and computer, you want the flexibility of being able to move away from your computer a little bit if you're shooting, you know, in a portrait scenario. If you're shooting product, you know, depending on how big that product may be, you might need to get away from your computer a little bit more. So typically, you know, we recommend like a standard length of 15 feet. You can tether up to 60 feet using various extensions, if you will. And then also repeaters or boosters.
Signal booster.
Tether Boost
and that's
Pro,
kind of what I
example.
was thinking of, because there is this limitation for USB transmission through a wire, and so you need to boost that signal if you're going to go farther.
Yeah, and the USB specification can also play into how you boost that signal or how far you can go. And, you know, without getting too deep in the weeds, you know, 15 feet, you don't typically need a booster for signal distance. But there are situations where you want to boost that signal because of the USB specification of the camera that you're using. So, and that gets getting a little bit away from the original question, but I do want to address that because that is an important one about boosting the signal. But, you know, if you are going beyond 15 feet to 30 to 45 to 60 through a variety of extension cables and boosters, you can get pretty far away from your computer.
So, I've seen a couple of those setups. They're pretty trick, and
you
can get pretty far away, and you know, the shooter can be out doing his thing, and other people can be looking at a distance, safe distance, whatever it might be, and then letting them know how the shoot's going. It's kind of a cool setup. For myself, when I'm doing like a still life or a product shot, I will put, you know, my laptop is there on a tether table, and it's on a wheeled tether table, and I'll wheel it around when I'm trying to move a little bounce card around, and I'll constantly just keep reshooting, so I don't have to be anywhere near my camera. Trigger the camera from the computer, so I'm not touching the camera, and then I can see each shot and then make those minor adjustments, and it's invaluable.
Yeah,
it really
absolutely.
has changed everything. The only thing I'd like to see, and I use Lightroom currently, is the ability to be able to do live view tethering. And I know Capture One does that. I'm kind of looking into that, but, you know, I'm kind of ingrained in my Lightroom, you know, like we all are. But it would be nice to see Lightroom, the folks at Adobe, step that up a little bit and get up to there. You guys in contact with them often? Do you know if they're aware or if they're working on anything?
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I'm a long-time Lightroom user, and I actually use both Capture One and Lightroom. I tether to Capture One, but I don't edit in Capture One. I take stuff over to Lightroom typically. I'd like to I'd
You're
like to
not
dabble a
alone.
little
That's a
bit
pretty
more.
big club now.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think it's a lot of it is just because we're used to it. I like the cataloging functions within Lightroom. I've got a system that kind of works for me. So, but I hear what you're saying. I mean, I'd like to kind of start in one place and end up in the same place. But I've got a workflow now that I kind of go back and forth between the two, capture and tether to capture one, and import to Lightroom, and then
Lightroom to do the final post production.
But as far as the awareness by Adobe of tethered photography and how more and more people are shooting tethered. Yes, I believe that they are aware of it. I do have friends at Adobe, and we've had conversations about that, and I would certainly like to see more robust support for tethered capture. I can't speak for them, but I'd like to think that they're aware of the need.
Yeah.
So I'd like to see, I'd like to see more robust function there.
Yeah.
We were talking about making that connection, that physical connection, and then it really becomes a matter of the application. I mean, tethering in general is a fairly easy process, but a lot of people kind of think there's a mystery to it, and there is, I guess. Once you've made that physical connection, you've figured out what cable you need, and it's like, now what? Well, like I said, get started using what you have. If you've got Lightroom already, and many people do, of course, there is some fairly basic tethered capture functionality there. Try that out. In your situation where you want to control the camera from the computer, an application like Capture One is going to give you more robust support.
Right.
With Lightroom, for example, you can trip the shutter.
Yep. And that's all I can do.
That's about it. Yeah. With Capture One, you can adjust just about every computer function in your camera, from f-stop to shutter speed to ISO. You got all that camera functionality there. So if you're shooting product, that's great. You could be looking at your exposure and dialing it up, and you're nowhere near your camera, like you said. Yep. And where many of us are shooting, I'll say, manageable subjects.
Sure.
But if you're shooting a car or a motorcycle or a piece of furniture, well, then gets to be a little different. Your camera might be mounted 10 feet
in a strange
in the air.
place, where you can't get to it.
You want to get up on a step ladder, and you're checking your camera and that. So that's where something like Capture One would be really beneficial, to not have to get over and make those adjustments.
A lot of the food photographers, they'll set the camera up and then do this
Exactly.
top-down kind of a thing.
Sure.
You can't get to the camera at all.
Right.
A lot of those people and they have to tether. They do, because that's the right thing to do. And a lot of them are using the live view function in the Capture One. Has been that's what started me into
moving their things around.
I really want to do that.
Yeah.
And so that brings up something else. So we've just had our Photokina.
Yep.
And a lot of new cameras have been announced. This whole mirrorless, we called it the mirrorless wars last week when we were doing one of these live broadcasts. So Tether Tools, how do you guys handle a lot of these new cameras? Do you know ahead of time that things are coming out, or do you not know until they've been announced?
It's always just like you guys. You're probably always trying to keep the pulse on the camera industry and what people are doing. So we sometimes get a little bit of lead time, but for us, a lot of times we're like the consumer. We got to get our hands on that physical camera. So we have every reason to believe that all the new Z series from Nikon and the EOS R is going to be perfectly compatible. And well, we already know what it is, but it comes down to that specification. So both of those cameras, for example, are using USB-C. USB-C, as best we know, and as our experience has shown us so far, is a very robust standard for us now.
Okay.
So I think it's really going to make the industry a little easier for both the consumer and manufacturers like us. It's one connection type. It's not 5-pin, 8-pin USB 3 micro B. You don't have all these
so many
standards.
different USBs.
Yeah.
It's nice to standardize it. And some cameras, I want to say, are using an HDMI. Do you do HDMI to USB?
We do make HDMI cables, but that kind of gets back to the original question, like, well, what is tethering?
Yeah.
Tethering's making that connection, but tethered capture can be different things. I mean,
Okay.
sometimes people misunderstand the concept of tethering for capture and tethering for video or for visual connections. So yes, we make HDMI cables, but that's typically for simply mirroring what's on the back of that camera. That's not data transmission.
That's not a data transmission.
It's sort of a video feed transmission.
Okay, cool. So you're handling, so what else do you do for the video people? There's a lot of videographers out there, not all stills people.
Yep, absolutely. We've got a variety of different accessories for the video market. Obviously, we make a variety of different HDMI cables and different lengths and things like that. And those all fall into line with our standards for cable manufacturing. We're not just grabbing an orange cable from some far off land and putting our name on it. Our cables are designed specifically by us, utilizing or adhering to the highest specifications for USB-C. So, they're designed to withstand the rigors of a working video or photo professional, coiling, uncoiling, rolling over them with carts, avoiding signal interference, with ferrite cores and heavier gauge wire, things like that. So, we address the video market with robust cables, just like the photo market.
That's cool. Very good. So, you had an announcement at the Photokina, and you were starting to learn a little bit about that. And can you at least talk a little bit about what that was?
Sure. Well, I'm here in your studio, and as if a lot of your viewers don't necessarily know, we happen to be based right next door to your studio. So I'm out here this week for our quarterly meeting and talking about results from Photokina and preparing for the holidays and things like that. But yeah, we had a great show at Photokina. I had a few meetings today, and we got some great feedback there. The response to our new product announcement, the OnSite Power suite of products, has been very well received. We've been talking about cables really a lot, and K-Sara, our wireless transmission device so far. But what people a lot of times don't understand is we don't just make those cables, we make all kinds of tools to support a tethered photo workflow or a video workflow, from hardware, again, tables, clamps, things like that. And what OnSite Power is a power source for photographers or videographers that are shooting on site that don't really have access to AC power. So we utilize, in the OnSite Power suite of products, we've got an inverter to plug AC devices into and USB devices. We also include mounts for our Aero tables, so you can mount a battery, a V-mount or D-tap battery underneath the table, so you now can power your laptop in the field for hours and hours.
Wow, that's really cool. That's a great idea, actually. Yeah, wow.
And it's not a new concept necessarily to the video market. D-tap battery technology has been out for a number of years, but for still photographers that are shooting on location, they really don't have access to those kinds of things or don't have visibility of those kinds of things. So that's what OnSite Power is designed to do.
Yeah, so the thing I like about that is that you've integrated it in and tidied it up where you can put it right on the table. It's not dangling, you're not jury-rigging a bunch of things with a bunch of straps and Velcro everywhere. It's tidy, it's got a place to be. I like that. It's when you have a lot of cables around, it's just one more thing to trip over, and it sounds really cool.
That's very important. I'm glad you picked up on that. It's a very important thing for us. We really, again, we're making products that are designed to help a tethered photographer, but it's not just about making products. It's about solutions. We want to make sure that a photographer or a videographer is keeping their equipment tight, safe. Making a safe set, if you will.
Absolutely.
And so keeping things tight footprint, products accessible and readily available without tripping over things is a big thing for us.
I actually was doing a little photo walk downtown about a year ago, and meeting another photographer. We were just walking from one place to another, and we looked across the intersection at a diagonal, and there was a photo shoot going on where there was a model walking down the sidewalk like a runway type of a fashion shoot, and someone was not paying attention or was not keeping up with the length of cable to the camera, and it went down.
Oh,
the whole laptop went down because the guy got to the end of the thing and he's shooting and he's getting the shot. It was not good.
Oh. Oh, that's painful.
Yeah, I mean, everyone's watching the model, right?
Yeah,
Instead of keeping up. Yeah, so yeah, unbelievable.
It must have been some model.
I don't know. We didn't, it was across the way, all we saw, and we could see it going down. There's nothing we could do. We were across the intersection. It's terrible. But, so, it has to be safe.
Yeah.
It's important to tidy this stuff up and keep track of it all.
Yep,
but,
absolutely.
And it's nice that they're orange.
Yeah, you know, it's funny. People, you know, they ask us about orange. We call it high visibility orange. You know, and it kind of happened that way. I mean, we designed it to be visible on set.
Yeah.
You know, we look around your set. You guys have a very nice tight set, by the way. Kudos to you.
Thank you.
But yeah, I mean, you know, set life can get very active, and there's a lot of stuff going on, and obviously different areas of the set are going to be dark, so that orange really, you know, shows up, and it's kind of become, you know, we've become the orange cable guys.
The orange cable guys, yeah. Well, you put orange accents in a lot of things.
Yeah.
I mean, some stuff still wants to be black, but yeah.
And the majority of our cables are available in both orange and black. I mean, there are certain situations where, yeah, you don't want it to be visible. You know, I mean, yes, it's great branding for us. At the same time, there is a purpose for it.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. So that's cool. So let's see if we got to cover most of our topics. I think we've actually covered quite a bit of ground here. It's been a really good talk. I'm glad you guys stopped over.
The one thing, hold on, because I did remember that I was going to talk about it. That Tether Boost Pro, it's a really important thing. You know, as I mentioned before, we make cables for all different types of cameras.
Yeah.
And that's based on not the camera itself, but the port type on the camera.
Okay.
But there's something that's really a common issue among USB 3 cameras. And that is that the computer manufacturers, as part of the USB 3 specification, either underpower or dynamically power the port on the camera. You know, between the
within the camera.
From within the camera. So what you're doing is, you know, the computer kind of goes to, well, it's not fair to say that the computer goes to sleep, but it goes into sort of a lower power state mode, and this is not a setting that you can adjust necessarily in the computer. But basically what happens is when it's dynamically powering this port, it loses that connection between the camera and the computer. So you could be shooting fine, everything's great, and all of a sudden it appears as if your connection is lost and you can't get it back. Without restarting the computer or something like that.
Or restarting the tether or something.
Yeah, so you know, people sometimes think, well, my cable's bad. It's not the case. Again, it's that port that's being underpowered. So something like that Tether Boost Pro that I mentioned, which is a device that's used to extend a signal over greater distances, is sometimes required with USB 3 cameras.
So where do you plug that in?
So that's going to plug in at the port on your computer, so your USB port.
Right.
And it's a dongle, it's about that long.
Okay.
Plugs into your USB port, and then you plug your Tether Pro cable into that Tether Boost Pro.
And then from there off to the camera.
And then to the camera, exactly.
So as opposed to putting this booster at the camera,
right,
you want to put it at the computer end. I think that's the important distinction.
Correct.
And we had a speaker in here a month or so ago, and he was talking about that, and he mentioned that because he actually went through the whole process, and everybody's going, really?
Yeah, that's what that's for?
Yeah,
Okay.
and so now they don't have to restart all the time.
Yeah,
it's an important distinction.
Important.
I'm glad you brought that up because that is important.
You know, we got to the point where we were, you know, putting a little label on the package with our USB 3 cables, like, hey, if you're buying this cable, there's a great chance you're going to need this other thing. So, so that is something definitely to recommend. So to the point you were saying about, you know, how exciting it is that these cameras are becoming more and more with coming out with USB-C ports.
Yes.
That's great because that's going to avoid that issue because the USB 3 specification for USB-C doesn't have that lower power state kind of mode thing.
So that issue will go away.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, that's good. Good to know.
Yeah, so that's really exciting for both the consumer and us.
Yeah. And so there's one other thing. We talked a little bit about safety, and you guys had a device early on called the jerk stopper.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We didn't talk about that.
And I've seen it everywhere. And when I first started tethering, you had a newer device, and I bought one of these things, and I absolutely love it. The Tether Block.
Yeah.
And it's great. It's got Arca Swiss grooves on there, so you don't have to stack a lot of things. What a great little device.
Yeah, so, you know, obviously we talk about making that connection, that physical connection with the camera and the computer, but it's very, very important that you protect the ports on both devices. And not only protect the port, but also just simply keeping the cable from popping out as we're moving around, especially portrait photographers where you're not sitting up on a tripod all the time, but if you're, you know, hand holding that camera and moving it around, you know, that cable is, you know, there's strain on that cable on that port, and if you're not careful, you could break that port off the circuit board inside the camera. That is not a cheap repair. And not to mention that, it's also time out of the field, you know, with that camera. So, I mean, if it takes 2, 3 weeks, 4 weeks to repair that camera, now you're relying on a backup. Hopefully you have a backup, or you're without your camera, and that's not good, certainly if you're working professionally. Yeah. So protect the port. The jerk stopper devices are basically a little lanyard that connects to the camera strap, connection on your camera, and loops around the cable so that as you move around, it places the tension on the lanyard itself and not the port on the camera. Tether block is a little bit more robust in that it's physically a piece of aluminum that's channeled out that you run your cable through, and you attach that to the 1/4-20 slot on the bottom of your camera.
Yep.
So then as you move around, it's really holding that connection tight.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, there was I had picked one up, and there was another photographer who does a lot of fitness models, and so he's moving around a lot, and he didn't like the jerk stopper, so he stopped using it. He was all kinds of trouble, and he asked me what that was, and he went right next door, and he just went and bought one.
nice.
Yeah, he says, I got to have this, and he loves it.
Yeah.
It's a really cool solution. I'm glad you guys come up with something like that.
Yep, we're happy to have it for sure.
Yeah, so that's really cool. So anything else you want to bring up tonight?
You know, we talked about making the connection. We talked about getting the right software.
Yeah.
We talked about wireless a little bit, in general at least, but wireless transmission of images from your camera to your computer is very popular.
So talk about this. So early on, there was the wireless, the Case Air is what we're talking about, right? And it was great to be able to go to iPad and that kind of thing. And I believe there's more capabilities now from about a year ago. There's support now for laptops.
Yes, well, we support iOS, Android, Mac, and Windows desktops. So
Right.
yeah, so you can connect to just about any device
Yeah,
now.
that's really cool.
One of the more prominent features that we recently added to Case Remote, which is the application that you would put on any one of those different types of devices, that accepts those images from the from Case Air, is we call it client lockout mode. So for example, I could give you the iPad. You could be viewing the images that I'm taking with my camera on the iPad, but you can't change anything. So for example, the Case Remote app, a lot like Capture One, where you can control the camera.
Control the camera settings.
Well,
yeah.
if you've got a client holding on, you don't want him or her messing with
Accidentally, yeah.
So you've got this new client lockout mode, so they can just be looking at the images as they come through.
And I believe, and stop me if I'm wrong, is there a way for that client to actually tag the images as they're going to ones that they'd like?
Rating and tagging is something that we're going to be offering, but not currently.
Okay, so that's what I heard. It was just a rumor then.
Capture One, when you're shooting tethered, with a cable, Capture One has a companion application that's got a little bit more robust functionality to do stuff like that.
Okay, yeah. So that would be a nice thing to have, though.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and so is the Case Air a JPEG download to the application, or are you able to view raw data at this point?
Yes and yes. So what you can do, and what we typically recommend that you do, is shoot both JPEG and RAW, and you are keeping the RAW files on the camera itself, on the card.
Okay.
And then you're just simply downloading the JPEGs or even JPEG previews. If you've got a 45, 50 megapixel image, raw image, transferring that wirelessly
is going to take some time. Yeah.
That takes some time, yeah. So typically what we recommend is you're shooting JPEG and RAW.
And the reason I ask these kind of questions, I bought one of these Case Airs when you guys first started carrying it.
Yeah.
And there was some growing pains with it.
Yeah, sure.
And there was a lot of firmware updates, and it got better and better and better with each one. Then I went to a wired tether.
Yeah.
So I could go directly into my laptop and do that. But I did enjoy using it.
Yeah, absolutely. We've made significant improvements to it over. I want to say over the years, but it hasn't been out that quite that long. But yes, we stay on top of it. The team that we use to develop the Case Remote application and the firmware updates and all that are pretty on top of it. So cool. we anticipate offering support for the Z series and the USR series with Canon now, and where was I go with that? I wanted to address the pros and cons of shooting tethered via cable or wireless.
Or wireless,
because
go ahead.
That's a common question.
Yeah.
You're always going to get the fastest transfer of an image from your camera to your computer via cable. I shouldn't say always, but for the foreseeable future. Yes, exactly. So I mean, it's nearly instantaneous, depending on the application you're using. Case Air is great, wireless is great, but it does take some time, especially, again, based on the size of the file, to get images wirelessly from your camera to whatever device you're shooting to. So if instantaneous viewing is paramount to your workflow, then we typically recommend a wired workflow or cabled workflow. So, but for outdoor photographers, for nature photographers, you simply want a larger screen. You can wait a second or two. That's when
and that's typically what it is. It's only a couple of seconds. I mean, it seems like an eternity because everything is so instant nowadays.
Yeah.
But it is only a couple of seconds.
It is. It is.
Yeah. So and like I said, it was a really cool device when it first came out. Really nice. I really enjoyed using it.
Yep.
Very cool. All right, so we good on time? Okay. So I think that's we're going to call it a wrap for the night. Like I said, I'm glad you happened to be in town. We're going to throw this impromptu interview together. And we'll sign off for tonight. And thanks again for stopping.
You're very welcome.
But before we go, you mentioned tethertools.com, and tell everyone else how they find yourself and anything else you want to do. Just one more final plug.
Yeah, sure. Like I said, the best place to start is tethertools.com.
Okay.
You know, you're going to do go up on the main menu, search by camera. That's the best place to start. That's going to
that's a menu selection, search by camera.
It's a menu selection. Yep, it's a search by camera, and you plug in, what you're using, and we're going to recommend all sorts of different products for you.
Okay, cool.
From the cable that you need to make that connection, the wireless devices, and so on. And then beyond that, we are very prolific in putting educational material out there for users of our products, people that want to learn more about the value of tethering and learn how people got the shot. In fact, I say that quite specifically because we make a series of articles and periodicals, if you will, PDFs, ebooks, things like that, that talk about how professional photographers got their shot. Nice little interviews, making product recommendations and how they go about approaching a shoot, and what products they use, and how they work with models and things like that. It's great educational material for folks. We also maintain the industry blog on the topic of tethered photography, Tether Talk.
Okay.
So you can go to tethertalk.com. And then, like I said, we pretty prolific in social media. We've got all kinds of stuff on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter and so on. So we invite everybody to follow us in those channels.
Cool, very cool. And so one final thing. So if anyone is going to purchase something, go to tethertools.com and make a purchase, there is a 10% discount?
That is correct.
There's a 10% discount if you use the code PAC, P-A-C, and that's for the Photographers Adventure Club. And that'll help you out a little bit.
Absolutely.
And but that's not through any other of the resellers. That's just from your website, correct?
That's correct. Yeah, that's a relationship that we have with PAC.
All right, very cool. All right, well, thanks again, Wes, for
You're
stopping
welcome,
by.
Scott. Thanks again.
And we'll sign it off. Good night, everybody. Thanks for watching.